Okay, so back to our question. What are the challenges that are present in the land, and how the plants evolved adaptations to be able to live in the land? So let's think of the land, living on the land, as pros and cons. So what are the advantages that the plants will get by moving to live into the land? As you can see, there is unfiltered sun. There are more plentiful amounts of carbon dioxide. The soil is rich in nutrients, and there are few herbivores or pathogens compared to aquatic environment. So in aquatic environment, to get an access of the sun, so the ancestors, the green algae, they had to live close to the seawater or the aquatic level in order to get an access to the sun. And the same for the amounts of carbon dioxide. They were not as much as the amounts of carbon dioxide on the land. And as you remember, the role of bacteria and fungi and being decomposers, returning the nutrients back to the soil. So the soil is a rich source of nutrients compared to what is present in the aquatic environment, and it is less susceptible environment to the attacks of pathogens and herbivores. So all of these are advantages that the plant would gain by moving, or by the move of their ancestors from the aquatic to the land environment. However, they have to deal with some disadvantages, which is the lack of structural support and the lack of water resources. So as we said, the ancestor of these plants, by living in an aquatic environment, the water itself surrounding the plant is a kind of support. The plants, by moving on land, they will lose this structural support by the water. And also, water is not only a structural support, it is a requirement for plants' growth. So by moving the land, they will have to evolve certain adaptations to get access to the water, which is more limited, obviously, than living inside the water itself. So this is like the big picture, the pros and cons of moving to the land. And let's move on to how plants dealt with each one of these difficulties. So the land is harsh and unpredictable. Being in water, they are covered with the water. They are more protected from the effect of the sunlight and the direct sunlight rays, and the UV rays, as we know, is mutagenic. So by being on the land, and especially with low ozone, they will be more exposed to the UV radiation, which is, as we said, mutagenic and harmful to the plant. It can cause the mutation, change in their genetic structure, and may finally lead to the death of the plant itself. And also the fluctuation of the temperature and the general conditions on the land, they are much severe than the fluctuation within the aquatic environment. So what is the adaptation that the plant has evolved? So as a response of that, the plant developed resistant structure, which we call the seeds. So the seeds are actually a resistant structure, a protective structure for the embryo. So the embryo of the plants is placed in this kind of protective environment, the seed. The seed is containing the nutrients for the growth of the embryo. And what the plant will say, okay, now the conditions are not favorable, let's put the embryo in this protective environment and structure, which is the seed, and let's hope that once the conditions are more suitable, the seed will grow and to give a new plant, and so on. So this was the adaptation of the plant to the harsh and unpredictable environment in land. Another challenge that the plants has to deal with was the fact that light, water, and nutrients are segregated on land. So imagine a situation of the ancestor of these plants living in the aquatic environment near to the surface of the water, not very deep, but just at the level of the water, and by that they have an access to the light, and they are already immersed in water, and they get the nutrients dissolved in the water. So everything is in one place. So compare it with the situation by moving to the land. The plants will need to get specialized body parts, and they need to develop transport system. So as we said during the evolutionary pathway, the first type of plants were non-vascular plants. They lack this transport system. That's why they couldn't go very further in colonizing the land, because they were limited to live in aquatic environment. So it was a major step in evolution by the development of this transport system, because it helped the dispersal and colonization of the plants inland. If we zoom on to this figure, we will see that the requirements of the plant that they need for growth includes the sunlight and exchange of gases. They need to absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen, and they need to absorb also water and minerals. So as we said, these resources are segregated, and that led to the fact that plants needed to develop different specialized organs and transport system. So we have the roots that absorb the water and minerals, and we have the leaves that perform the photosynthesis, and they allow the exchange of gases. And then, since this is in one area and the roots are in another area, they had to transport the materials. So water and minerals will go up from the root to the different parts of the plants, and the sugars coming from photosynthesis are transported from the leaves to the different parts of the plants, and so on. So that was the solution of the segregation of the light and water and nutrients. Then another challenge was the desiccating nature of the land. So the evaporation is really a challenge there that could eventually lead to the death of the plant. So as you can see, in very dry areas like this, the plant may even be under the stress of not surviving. So in order to adapt to that, the surface of the plant was covered by a waxy cuticle that prevents the evaporation and loss of water. And you may be wondering how to solve the fact that the leaves, they need to exchange the gases, as we mentioned. So how to deal with the waxy layer. The areas, certain areas in this waxy cuticle are gated by like gates that open and close. These are called the stomata. So stomata allow the respiration, the exchange of gases, and that is another adaptation, because having this stomata gives the plant the ability to control the opening and closure of these stomata, again to preserve the water and to avoid the loss of the water due to evaporation. So here is a zoom into one of these stomata, as you can see. So there are structures in the leaves of the plant that allow exchange of gases, but it is like controlled gates that can be opened and closed. The next challenge was again the dryness of the land. So the dryness of the land is not only a challenge in terms of evaporation of water, but also in terms of reproduction. And the reason for that is that the ancestors of these plants and even the first generations of these plants, as we said, for example, the non-vascular plants, they reproduced through flagellated sperms. So sperms have flagella, and in order for these sperms to move on to fertilize the egg, they need to swim in water. So since the land is dry, this is a major problem for reproduction, and the solution of that was the development of pollen. So pollen grains are a way of avoiding the need of flagellated sperms. Now the pollen grain can be moved to further areas by the help of the winds or insects, and it doesn't need the availability of water. So pollens was an evolutionary solution to overcome the need of water for reproduction. Then the next challenge, as we said, was the lack of support. As we explained before, the presence of the ancestor in the aquatic environment helped them by supporting the body of the ancestor. By moving to the land, the plants lack this kind of support. Even it's not a support, it's a negative factor. Once the plants start to grow large, the gravity force will pull the branches of the trees down, which is something that the plant has to solve by evolution, and that necessitated the presence of supported tissues and thickened cell walls. So if you remember, that plant cell walls are made up of cellulose, and there is another factor, which is the lignin. So lignin is there supporting and thickening the cell walls of plant, and because of that, lignin is playing a major role in the ability of plants to grow in upright position and to withstand the gravity force and the lack of support in land compared to in the aquatic environment.